It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon. Steven Seagal stepped out of a small cafe on a busy street, holding a paper cup of coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards. He wasn't dressed like a movie star. No flashy jacket, no sunglasses, just a dark hoodie, loose jeans, and worn-in sneakers. To most people passing by, he looked like just another middle-aged man heading home after a long day, but a group of men standing near the corner didn't see him that way. They were loud, restless, leaning against a parked car. Their laughter was sharp and careless, the kind that made people around them walk a little faster. One of them nudged another and nodded toward Steven. "Look at this guy." One of them muttered, "He looks lost." Another replied with a grin. Steven slowed for a second, sensing the shift in energy. He didn't stare. He didn't react. He simply kept walking. That calmness bothered them. The men straightened up, their voices lowered, their smiles turned into smirks, and suddenly, one of them stepped forward, blocking Steven's path. "Hey," the man said, dragging out the word. "Where you think you're going?" Steven lifted his eyes slowly. His face stayed relaxed. His voice was steady. "Just heading home," the man chuckled. "Home, huh? You sure you're in the right neighborhood?" A few pedestrians nearby glanced over. Something about the scene felt wrong. Too quiet. Too tense. Steven shifted the coffee cup in his hand, keeping his other hand visible. "I'm not bothering anyone," he said calmly. "I'm just passing through." But the men didn't step aside. Instead, two more moved closer. Their shadows fell across the sidewalk. The air felt heavier. The street noise faded, replaced by uneasy silence. Steven stood still, relaxed, balanced, completely unshaken. What none of them realized, what nobody on that street could see, was that the man they were testing wasn't just another stranger. He was someone who had spent decades mastering control, discipline, and combat, a fighter who had faced far more dangerous situations than this, and in just a few moments, they were about to understand exactly who they had chosen to threaten. The man blocking Steven's path tilted his head slightly, studying him like a puzzle he didn't trust. "So," he said slowly, "you just wandering around? Or you got business here?" Steven didn't step back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't tense up. "Just passing through," he replied. That answer seemed to irritate them. One of the other men laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that echoed off the buildings. "You hear that? He's just passing through." Another stepped closer, close enough that Steven could smell the faint trace of smoke on his breath. "This street isn't for tourists," the man said. "People get confused out here, and confused people get into trouble." Steven remained calm, his posture relaxed, his hands open at his sides. "I'm not here to cause problems," he said evenly, "and I don't want any." The leader rolled his shoulders and smirked. "Funny thing is, problems sometimes find people." Pedestrians on the sidewalk began to slow. Some pretended to check their phones while secretly watching. Others crossed to the other side of the street. The mood had changed, the kind of tension you could feel, even if you weren't part of it. One woman whispered, "Is that guy okay?" Steven shifted slightly, keeping his feet planted firmly on the ground. His body looked loose but perfectly balanced. The men circled a little, not fully surrounding him, but enough to make their intention clear. "So tell me," the leader continued, "what you got in your pockets?" Steven raised an eyebrow slightly. "Just my phone and my keys," the man snorted. "Let me see." Steven didn't move. "I'd rather not," he said. "There's no reason for that." That was the moment the smiles faded. The leader's eyes narrowed. "You refusing me?" "I'm saying I don't see a reason," Steven replied calmly. Phones quietly came out in the background. Someone across the street began recording. Another person whispered, "This might get ugly." The leader stepped even closer, too close. "You think you're tough?" he said. "You think because you're calm, you're untouchable?" Steven met his eyes for the first time. Not angry, not afraid, just calm. "I think everyone deserves respect," Steven said quietly. "That's all." The man scoffed. "Respect is earned, and intimidation isn't how you earn it," Steven replied. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. For a brief second, the leader hesitated. Then he laughed loudly to cover it. "You're a funny guy," he said. "But funny guys get hurt too." The men around him chuckled. Steven didn't react. Inside, he was fully alert, balanced, aware of every movement, every breath, every footstep around him. They thought they were reading him, but they were only seeing what he allowed them to see. What they didn't realize was that his calm wasn't weakness, it was control, and in the next moment, they were about to push far enough to discover the difference. The leader of the gang stepped even closer, his shadow falling across Stephen's chest. His grin was sharp, predatory, the kind that made a normal person's stomach tighten. "You think you can just stand there, calm, like nothing's happening?" he sneered. "You're asking for trouble, buddy." Stephen's eyes met his, steady, unflinching. His voice remained even, controlled. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said quietly. "But I won't step aside if none is meant for me." The leader laughed a low, dangerous sound. "Step aside? I don't think so. You think you're untouchable? You think I'm scared of you?" With that, another man, taller, bigger, joined the circle. They began to close in, subtly blocking escape routes. Stephen could feel their aggression radiating outward, like heat from a fire. Pedestrians slowed even more. Phones came out. A woman whispered, "Is this really happening?" Another man murmured, "Someone call the cops." The gangsters weren't just testing him, they were daring him, and they thought their numbers gave them an advantage. One of the younger men took a step forward, poking Stephen's shoulder. "You sure you're not hiding anything? You look like trouble waiting to happen." Stephen stayed perfectly still. He exhaled slowly, shoulders relaxed. His calm was unnerving. It made the men hesitate for just a moment, just long enough for the crowd to feel it too. "Look," Stephen said, his voice soft but carrying authority. "You're sizing me up because you think I'll react the way you expect. But that's not how respect works. You don't get respect by intimidating someone." A brief silence fell. The men looked at one another, unsure if they should push further. "Respect?" the leader snapped. "You're joking, right?" "I'm serious," Stephen said, "and I suggest you think about what that means. Not just for me, but for yourself." That calm defiance made one of the gangsters scoff, but he didn't move. Something about the way Stephen held himself, relaxed, grounded, aware, made their bravado feel weak. The leader's voice rose. "You think you can talk to me like that? You're lucky I don't throw you down right now." Before anyone could react, Stephen shifted just slightly. His movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, but there was precision behind it, the kind that comes from decades of discipline and combat training. He didn't lunge, he didn't strike, he simply prepared, mentally, for what was coming next. The men noticed the change in energy. Something unspoken passed through the circle. This man isn't ordinary. His calm isn't fear. It's control. Power restrained, but ready. A few bystanders gasped quietly. Phones zoomed in, recording the tension. A man whispered to his friend, "Dude, I don't think they know who this is yet. And if they did, they'd be running." The leader, oblivious to the signals, poked again, this time harder. "You think standing there like a statue makes you tough? I could crush you right now." Stephen didn't flinch. He didn't back up. Instead, he slowly raised his hand, not in a threatening gesture, just palm open, level with his chest. "Listen to me carefully," he said, each word deliberate. "I don't want violence. I don't want conflict. But I will not allow you to intimidate me or anyone around me. That's your choice. But make no mistake, crossing this line will be your mistake, not mine." A silence fell over the street. Pedestrians held their breath. Phones recorded. Even some of the gangsters hesitated. And that was when Stephen knew. They were starting to realize this wasn't going to be an easy target. If you were standing here, would you freeze like the bystanders? Or step in to stop them? Comment what you'd do, be honest. Time seemed to stretch. The men glanced at each other nervously. The energy shifted, almost imperceptibly, but enough to make the crowd lean in. The line between bravado and danger was razor thin. Stephen's eyes scanned the circle, calculating, aware, calm. The gang thought they were controlling the scene, but in reality, they were the ones being studied. Every breath, every shift, every micro-expression, Stephen saw it all. The first seed of fear had already taken root, and soon they were going to regret ever thinking they could intimidate him. For a moment, the street felt smaller. The city noise faded into a quiet hum as the gangsters circled Stephen, their confidence beginning to crack. Then, it happened. One of the younger men, the one who had been leaning casually against the car, squinted at Stephen's face, his brow furrowed. Something about the calmness, the posture, The controlled gaze triggered a memory. "Wait," he whispered under his breath. Is that Steven Seagal?" The words barely left his mouth before they spread. The taller gangster turned, glanced quickly, and froze mid-step. His smirk faltered. "Steven Seagal, the actor, martial artist," he muttered, almost disbelieving. The leader, unaware of the recognition, shrugged. "What? Who's Steven Seagal?" But the younger man didn't answer. His eyes widened, and suddenly, the world shifted for him. "Dude, that's him, the real deal," he hissed. "The guy from the movies. He's a deadly fighter." The moment was electric. A wave of disbelief and panic spread through the gang. The air, already thick with tension, became almost suffocating. Pedestrians whispered nervously, phones shaking slightly in their hands as they recorded the unfolding drama. Steven, meanwhile, remained perfectly still, calm, focused. Not a single flicker of arrogance or intimidation crossed his face. He wasn't showing off. He didn't need to. His presence alone communicated a force stronger than any words. The leader, still oblivious, took another step forward, unaware that the man in front of him had defeated some of the most dangerous people in controlled combat situations countless times before. "Step aside, buddy," the leader sneered. "You're making me wait." Steven's eyes shifted slightly toward him. Slowly, deliberately. There was no anger, no malice, just an intensity that made the leader hesitate, the kind of intensity that could see every action before it happened. "Respect isn't demanded," Steven said quietly, almost conversationally. "It's understood, and it's earned by knowing your own limits and respecting others." The words, soft yet firm, struck the leader like a cold wind. The surrounding gangsters exchanged nervous glances. Doubt replaced bravado. Their confidence faltered. "Wait, you're not bluffing, are you?" one of them whispered to another. Steven didn't reply. He didn't need to. His calm control said it all. Every muscle relaxed, every breath measured, the kind of power that doesn't need to shout. The younger man, still staring, whispered again, "Do you realize what we almost did? This is Steven Seagal, a man who could end this in seconds. We're dead if he wanted." The energy shifted instantly. The leader's hands, once ready to intimidate, now twitched nervously. He tried to laugh it off, but it came out as a strained chuckle. You're just an actor, right?" he said shakily. Steven's calm gaze never wavered. "I'm a martial artist. That means I understand control, awareness, and consequences." The crowd around them held their breath. You could feel the weight of the moment, the gangsters on edge, the bystanders mesmerized, and the quiet street watching history unfold. The recognition wasn't just about fame. It was about the undeniable presence of a man who commanded respect, without threatening, without raising his voice, without striking a single blow. A subtle shiver ran through the gang. The realization had hit. They had misjudged a master. They had stepped into the wrong street, with the wrong man, at the wrong time. And all they could do now was back away, uncertain, humbled, and suddenly painfully aware of just how dangerous their target truly was. Meanwhile, Steven remained calm, not gloating, not celebrating, simply standing there, a living reminder that true power doesn't need to be shown. It only needs to exist. The bystanders too felt the shift. Phones raised, eyes wide. Murmurs of astonishment spread. "That's Steven Seagal. He's a master." And just like that, the street that had been tense and hostile moments ago was now a stage of silent awe. Steven's calm control, his disciplined presence, had completely flipped the narrative. The gangster's intimidation had failed before it had even begun. Have you ever underestimated someone just by looking at them? Comment yes or no, and tell us why. The leader of the gang was still trying to regain his composure. His smirk had faded, replaced by a flicker of unease. The others shuffled nervously behind him, glancing at each other, unsure whether to push forward or retreat. Steven Seagal didn't move a muscle. His eyes were calm, sharp, and unreadable. His posture was relaxed, but every inch of his body screamed control, precision, and readiness. The street seemed to shrink around him, tension thick enough to touch. The leader, trying to reassert dominance, stepped closer. "You think standing there like some wise monk makes you untouchable?" he sneered. "I could take you down in a second if I wanted." Steven's gaze didn't waver. He lifted his hand slowly, palm open, showing he wasn't a threat yet. Every word he spoke carried authority, cold and measured. "Violence isn't something I seek," Stephen said quietly, "but disrespect, ignorance, and foolish threats. Those are mistakes you won't get away with. You've already crossed the line. Now you're learning its weight." The leader's jaw tightened. His bravado, once so solid, faltered. He glanced at his men, trying to regain confidence, but their hesitation betrayed him. Every step they took forward seemed heavier. Every breath they drew carried doubt. "You're just a man," the leader spat, trying to sound fearless. "You can't scare me with words." Stephen shifted slightly subtle, almost imperceptible, yet the energy around him changed. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't a threat. It was awareness, control. Every inch of space Stephen occupied suddenly felt like a barrier. Every movement he made carried consequence. "I am just a man," he said calmly, "but I am a man who understands the difference between foolishness and respect. You're testing a line you don't know exists, and crossing it comes at a price you can't calculate in seconds." A few bystanders whispered to one another, phones recording in shaky hands. Some held their breath, sensing the shift in the street's energy. Even the wind seemed to pause, as though waiting to see what would happen next. The leader's hand twitched, a nervous gesture betraying his fear. His men began to look around for an escape, something to distract them, a way to exit gracefully without losing face. Stephen's eyes flicked to each of them, in turn the leader, the tall man behind him, the younger thug who had recognized him. Each glance was measured, each movement deliberate. "You think this is about fear?" Stephen said softly. "It's not. It's about respect. Not because of who I am, but because of what you're choosing to do. Ignorance will always find its consequence, sometimes slowly, sometimes instantly." The leader's voice faltered. What do you want from us?" Stephen tilted his head slightly. His voice remained calm, almost conversational. "I want nothing. I want this moment to be a lesson. Control yourself, respect others, understand your own limits before they're revealed to you, the hard way." For a moment, silence fell. The kind of silence heavy enough to make the world pause. The gang's bravado had evaporated entirely. Their confidence was gone. The street had turned into a stage of awe, not for spectacle, but for power measured in calm, not violence. Stephen didn't raise a fist. He didn't shout. He didn't move aggressively. Yet every muscle in the gang's bodies screamed the same message. They had miscalculated. One of the bystanders whispered in disbelief. He didn't even touch them, and they're terrified. Another nodded, phone shaking in hand. That's not just calm, that's absolute control. And Stephen, standing quietly, allowed them to feel it fully. The realization hit. Numbers, intimidation, aggression, none of it mattered. None of it could overpower discipline, focus, and mastery. The leader swallowed hard. His men shuffled uneasily behind him. For the first time, they weren't sure who the predator was, and deep down, they knew the answer. Stephen's presence wasn't just intimidating, it was undeniable. It was the living proof that true strength doesn't need to strike first, it waits. The crowd, too, sensed it. Phones continued recording, mouths whispered, hearts raced. The moment had shifted entirely. The gang's intimidation had failed, and Steven Seagal's calm authority had completely rewritten the rules of the encounter. Have you ever faced someone who controlled a situation just with presence? Comment yes or no, and tell us what you'd do if you were there. For a heartbeat, the street held its breath. The gang, still trying to process Steven Seagal's calm authority, froze in place. The leader's smirk had completely vanished. His men shifted uneasily, eyes darting between Stephen and the small crowd of bystanders who had begun murmuring in disbelief. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a voice rang out. "Guys, don't you get it? That's Steven Seagal." The words hit the gang like a lightning bolt. "Steven Seagal?" One of the men muttered, incredulous. "The actor? Martial artist? The guy from the movies?" The leader's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to argue, to claim it was impossible, but no words came. Every pedestrian holding a phone now realized who was standing before them. Whispers spread like wildfire. That's him, the real Steven Seagal, deadly in the movies, and probably in real life. The younger gang members began to step back instinctively, their bravado evaporating instantly. One of them muttered under his breath, We messed up. Stephen's eyes didn't shift. He remained calm, controlled, unshaken. His body language didn't change. And yet, that very calm, that quiet presence, now carried more weight than any threat the gang could muster. The leader's voice cracked. No, no way. You can't. A bystander leaned forward, whispering, Yes, way. That's the man who could take all of you down in seconds without breaking a sweat. A shiver ran through the group. Their earlier confidence, the energy they had wielded to intimidate a stranger, dissolved into fear. Every slight movement, every breath from Stephen, reminded them they were out of their depth. Stephen's calm gaze swept across them. Not in anger, not in revenge, just awareness. You've already tested a line, he said softly, voice carrying an authority that cut through the street. And now you're learning its weight. The leader stumbled backward slightly. His hands fumbled. He tried to maintain control, but it was impossible. His crew looked to him for guidance, but he had none. The crowd, sensing the moment, began to cheer quietly. Phones continued to record, some zooming in, capturing every reaction, every micro-expression of the men who had thought they were untouchable. One bystander whispered to another, Do you see their faces? They have no idea what just hit them. Another nodded. They underestimated him. Badly. Stephen didn't raise a fist. He didn't strike. He didn't need to. His mere presence, his disciplined aura, and the subtle control in his movements had completely dismantled their intimidation. The younger gang members now looked nervously at the street beyond, calculating escape routes, realizing too late that they had challenged someone far beyond their understanding. The leader's voice finally returned, but it was weak, trembling. I didn't know. I had no idea. Stephen tilted his head slightly, eyes sharp, voice calm. Now you know, and that knowledge is your lesson. Respect is earned, not assumed, and threats have consequences, whether you see them immediately or later. Jade, a wave of applause rippled through the small crowd. People were cheering not for a fight, but for the dignity, control, and authority Stephen had displayed. Phones captured the moment, ready to send it viral across the world. The gang, fully embarrassed, shuffled back, avoiding eye contact. Their plan to intimidate had completely failed. They had confronted someone they didn't understand, and survived only because Stephen chose not to strike. Pedestrians whispered among themselves, awe spreading. That was insane. He didn't even move, and they were terrified. Calm control beats aggression, every time. The moment he spoke, it was like everything froze. And Stephen, standing there quietly, allowed them to feel the lesson fully. No gloating, no humiliation. Just the quiet authority of a master who didn't need to prove himself through violence, only through discipline and presence. Have you ever seen someone instantly regret their choices? Type yes or no, and tell us how you'd react if you were in this street. For a moment, the street was no longer a battlefield. It was a stage for respect, a lesson in awareness, control, and the invisible power of presence. And Steven Seagal, calm, disciplined, undefeated, had just delivered it perfectly. The gangsters had scattered. Their confidence shattered. Their bravado gone. For the first time, they realized the full weight of their mistake, underestimating a man who exuded calm authority, discipline, and experience beyond their comprehension. The crowd that had gathered slowly began to relax. Some clapped quietly. Others whispered in awe. Phones continued to record, capturing the stunned faces of both the gang and the onlookers. Every glance, every gesture, told the story better than words ever could. Steven Seagal didn't gloat. He didn't call attention to himself. He simply adjusted his jacket, took a deep breath, and started walking again, the energy around him still commanding respect. His calm presence lingered, a subtle reminder that true power doesn't need to be proven, it just exists. People approached him cautiously, some asking for photos, others expressing admiration for how he handled the situation. Stephen acknowledged them with a nod, a small smile, never breaking the composure that had saved the moment from escalating into violence. Across the city and quickly, across the internet, the video of the encounter began to circulate. Within hours, it went viral. Millions of people shared and commented, amazed at how a man could command authority without striking a single blow. Discussions exploded on social media. Did you see how calm he was? This is the ultimate lesson in control and respect. He didn't need to fight. Presence alone handled it. The gang's embarrassment also spread online. Videos highlighted their panic and fear, turning what was intended as an act of intimidation into a lesson in humility. They became an example of what happens when arrogance meets someone who understands their own strength. Stephen's handling of the situation became more than a story of intimidation. It became a lesson in mental and emotional discipline, a masterclass in how calm authority can diffuse conflict and turn fear into understanding. The public admired not just his skill, but his restraint, his wisdom, and his ability to turn a dangerous encounter into a demonstration of dignity. By the next day, news outlets and online communities were sharing the footage. Discussions were not about violence, but about respect, self-control, and how true strength doesn't have to show itself through aggression. Stephen's message that respect is earned, not assumed, and that awareness and discipline are more powerful than brute force was spreading worldwide. Some commentators pointed out that this was a rare kind of heroism, quiet, controlled, and confident. Unlike many viral encounters, there was no escalation, no fight to the death, just awareness, calm, and moral authority. And the crowd that witnessed it firsthand knew something profound. Intimidation could fail if confronted with discipline, respect, and the quiet but undeniable presence of someone who had mastered themselves first. As Stephen walked away from the street, he glanced back once. No threat remained, no danger lingered. Only the lesson remained, and it was one that would echo far beyond the street where it had begun. If you believe nobody should be underestimated and everyone deserves respect, type respect in the comments. Subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. And never forget, calm control is more powerful than aggression. The street returned to normal, but the lesson stayed. The gangsters had learned humility. The crowd had witnessed true presence. And the world, through millions of viral views, had absorbed a timeless message. Power lies not in aggression, but in discipline, calm, and awareness. Steven Seagal didn't need to fight. He had already won.